Good afternoon. I'm pleased to announce my nomination of Dr. Condoleezza Rice to be America's Secretary of State. I'm submitting the name of Donald Rumsfeld to be Secretary of Defense. I'm proud to announce that Dick Cheney, a man of great integrity, sound judgment, and experience, is my choice to be the next Vice President of the United States. The chief executive is the tone setter. You can't expect your vice president, if you're running a company, to set the tone for the company. It's the chief executive who goes to stockbrokers and the public. It's the chief executive who sends signals throughout an organization. Same with the president. When you set up a team, you want to make sure that there is a general agreement about the philosophy of the policies that you intend to implement. In other words, step one of the screening process is you campaign, you win on a set of issues, people pretty much understand your philosophy, and if you don't agree with that general philosophy, then you really shouldn't be on the team. That's the first screen. And that makes sense. Secondly, though, that once the direction of the policy is understood, you expect diverse opinions. And I got a lot of opinions on some of these difficult subjects. And so there's always, what kind of temperament are you looking for? Is that person willing to endure the long hours? Is their life balanced enough to be able to have a healthy home life? I was always looking for balance amongst gender and race and religion. It was important to me that people from all walks of life were included in my administration. The selection of Vice President Dick Cheney, it's the first presidential decision. It's the first chance the people get to see what kind of decision maker you'll be. Is the process thorough? Have you consulted other people? Have you thought of all options? And in looking for the vice president, I wanted the following. I wanted someone who would not be running for president immediately upon being sworn in, because that creates enormous difficulties inside the White House. I wanted someone who knew Washington, because I didn't know Washington. I thought it sent a signal that I'm self-aware. I wanted to send a message that I took the pick seriously and understood what the pick needed to address. I think it reflected well. But the main thing is he could be president. As much as presidential nominees don't want to admit it, that person may be needed. And so he passed the first test easily because he could have been president. I knew what my shortcomings were, and I think we did a good job of finding people that could address those shortcomings. For example, in foreign policy, my only foreign policy experience was as governor of Texas, dealing with border governors from Mexico. So therefore, Condi Rice became an integral part of my campaign, but more importantly, my administrations. She knew a lot about foreign policy. I fortunately had convinced Hank Paulson toward the end of my presidency to become the Secretary of the Treasury. I instinctively knew I needed him by my side just because he knew so much about Wall Street and I knew nothing about Wall Street. I could always use help when it came to financial matters. And so he agreed to join. He was a hard worker. I remember he came one time and told me, he said, when you announced my appointment for the Secretary of the Treasury, my mother chewed me out. And I said, why? Because I joined your administration. And we had a big laugh out of that. I got along with him well. But there's a good example of right time, right fit. I felt I had a pretty good antennae when it came to reading moods and understanding the politics and working with Congress, but you can never have enough help. And so I picked people that shored up weakness, and I picked people that enhanced strengths. Our transition was somewhat shortened. We were prepared because we started preparing the day after the election. I asked Vice President Cheney, who had enormous Washington experience, to be a part of a transition with my friend Clay Johnson, who was head of my personnel as governor and then was my chief of staff during the campaign. And he was in charge of beginning to implement the transition. Campaigning gives you a chance to say, this is what I'm going to do. And then it became imperative for us to put people in place that would enable us to get that done. In order to have an effective transition, I had to have people I trusted. I trusted Clay a lot. He asked me, what do you want in this new job? And I said, it was nothing different than you did as governor. I want the best people, but don't do something politically stupid. The process he set up was a brilliant process. It started with, what kind of personalities do you want for the respective positions? What are you trying to achieve from a policy perspective? And can that person help you achieve it? But there was a lot of other issues that were important, and I knew Clay would think along the lines I think along. We wanted people there who were there to serve something greater than self, which, by the way, is really important for anybody in a managerial position to understand the importance of culture. And that starts at the top, but also with people who understand the culture you're trying to set up. Therefore, we were looking for team players. That didn't mean they had to subsume their thoughts or their opinions, but it did mean that they had to fit into a culture that wasn't trying to make me look good or wasn't trying to advance, a political party, but was there to serve the country first and foremost. And then once a appointee was selected to be presented to me, they ran political checks, because it could be one of the greatest political appointments ever, but it turns out that person had created a political firestorm at some point that would make either the nomination unbelievably contentious or make confirmation very difficult. The other thing that Clay did was very smart, was he recognized that once we got our cabinet positions filled, that he would collaborate with the cabinet officers to pick sub-officers, the deputies and the assistants. And that was important because they had to reach a consensus. The White House and each department had to reach a consensus on who that person should be. And by doing that, it enabled us to align authority and responsibility. In other words, if we'd have demanded a Department of Housing and Urban Development hire this person without consent of the secretary and or other appropriate people, and that person ended up doing a lousy job, we couldn't hold the secretary to account. And so we knew that going in, and therefore the transition, while short, was pretty smooth. And so it was complicated, but I was comfortable, and these people did a good job. I think any leader must want to have people around who don't necessarily agree, because if you surround yourself with people who only agree with you, in essence says that you're more important than the team. It says that I'm going to have a culture based upon me. Cultures based upon individuals tend to fail. Come and work for me and make me look good. But people are fallible. And that culture is inevitably going to collapse. And when a leader has people around who don't necessarily agree and are willing to express their opinion, it is a sign that the leader has got the right perspective. Now, having said that, it's really important in an organization when the leader makes up his or her mind to do something, that people then say, you've made up your mind, I'm now willing to follow. And oftentimes in the political process, you hear people say, I didn't agree with that. If something turns south, they're out there chirping to the press. That also is very destabilizing to an organization. There's a certain loyalty to a cause greater than self that is necessary to make that concept work. And if you surround yourself with people who might buy into the concept of team, but really aren't loyal people to their core, that they end up creating unbelievable dysfunction. Washington is a town full of gossips and people willing to talk to the press off the record to make themselves look better. But that can be a very destabilizing part of any administration. I think when you give people feedback, you do so in a way that is a learning experience as opposed to trying to diminish them. A terrible leader is someone who views life as zero-sum. I'm going to be a big person, and therefore I'm going to make you a little person. A good leader is one that says, we're both little people, how can we grow together? Humility is an important trait in good managing. And humility starts with understanding that you're not it. You're part of something greater than self. And constantly remind yourself, like my religion teaches that I'm a sinner and need redemption. And to me, that's a part of being humble. Once you recognize you're a sinner, it's easier not to castigate your fellow man. I mean, people ask me all the time about favorite Bible verses, maybe not on Masterclass, but nevertheless, should not be taking a speck out of your eye when I got a log in my own. To me, that's a lesson in how to approach other people. The key thing for any leader is to be a thoughtful, kind person as opposed to a bully. If there's a mistake that's made, there are several ways to handle that. One is to make it a learning experience. But the only way to make it a learning experience is not to belittle or humiliate the person who made the mistake. Whether it's mistakes or whether it's trying to get people to head in the right direction, it's basically the same. What do I need to do to motivate this person to be a better person? And it starts with making sure you're a better person. And one of the hardest things about leadership is to be a thoughtful leader and not let power and position cloud your judgment when it comes to helping others. At one point during my dad's administration, he asked me to analyze the White House. It was a moment of great pride for me because here was my dad seeking my expertise, I guess you'd say, on figuring out what people were thinking about. And I was involved with the Rangers, but it was more than happy to help. I went up and interviewed everybody on his team, and it became clear to me there was great frustration because people in his administration weren't able to get to him and tell their opinions. I said, Dad, I think that in order to create a better culture, it's really important that you change your leadership in the White House. And he thought about it. And he said, well, who's going to tell, in this case, John Sununu, who had done a wonderful job for Dad, by the way. It's just that sometimes organizations creep over time. And I'm saying to myself, wow, you don't have anybody to tell him? A lesson I learned there is if you're in a leadership role, you better do it yourself if you need to make a change or have somebody do it for you that's credible. At any rate, I was the one. And so I went in to see John, who gracefully listened to my suggestion that he give Dad the opportunity to change leaders, which he eventually did. And I learned something very profound then, and that is that change can be hard, and therefore you better be ready to make change that's effective. Sometimes it is a painful experience. And I'm sure people listening who've had to do that would tell you it can be very painful and nerve-wracking for the person doing the firing. You know, you're just not sure how somebody's going to react. But, you know, I did a fair amount of that during my time, tried to handle it as gently as I could and allow the person to leave with dignity. I mean, I think of my friend Harriet Mier, who I nominated for the Supreme Court, and it was one of the most difficult periods for me in Washington because I loved Harriet. She'd have been a great Supreme Court judge. We needed a woman on the Supreme Court. She'd have been solid in her philosophical beliefs and yet didn't pass muster primarily because she wasn't glib, and nor did she go to an Ivy League law school. And, you know, she got out there and some of my supporters or supposed supporters got after her early, and then the other side piled on. And as time went on, it became apparent that she couldn't get nominated. And so Andy Card called me and said, you know, I think we're going to have to pull down Harriet. He'd had a lot of experience with this, evidently, because he handled it brilliantly. I said, Andy, take care of it. And he said, I will. She called me that night and said, I want you to know I'm pulling down my nomination. And I told her how sorry I was. And I was sorry I put her in that place to begin with. The next day I get to the White House, I get there early, and Harriet's already there going to everybody's office, consoling the younger staffers because they loved her so much. And as painful as these can be, sometimes there's a necessity that you have to make those changes. And that's what leaders in organizations do. We've spent a lot of time talking about leadership and values, and now I'd like to be joined by a very special person, the former First Lady, my wife, Laura Bush.
Hey.
Welcome. Welcome to Masterclass.
Thanks, great. Glad to be here.
Laura was great about building a culture of team. She would have young families, mothers with young children, fathers with young children, come to the theater and watch children's movies. And it gave them a sense of belonging and a sense of being a part of the team. I think a manager has got to be mindful of job satisfaction among the people he or she works with. Part of job satisfaction is to have a family life that is not troubled. And one way to make sure it's not troubled is to make sure parents know that they can take time off to be with their kids. Obviously, there's a limit to that, but there were plenty of opportunities for us to provide such opportunities. And Laura did that a lot. You know, had them come to the Easter egg roll or had them come to the movies, which was very effective. A good manager says, what does it take to keep people satisfied on the job? And you listen to what they have to say. And part of it is understanding the pressures that come with having a family.
I mean, I think that just was second nature to make sure their families were involved in everything we did and that they got to come to the Easter egg roll with their children and do all the things that happen at the White House that they'd be invited to and included. And I think they always knew that. I think there was a lot of security in it. You have to remember that we were there on September 11th, that's when we lived there, and that people were afraid. They were told that morning to run, to kick off their high heels and run from the White House. So there was always, a slight nervousness among the staff that worked there because of what had happened. The whole 8 years, I think. So there were, a lot of ways that we tried to reassure them and their spouses as well and their children and make sure they were included in what we did. But everybody stayed and everybody kept working and rallied to the cause. The people that worked for us were satisfied and happy with their jobs.
We had pretty low turnover, which is a good sign that our culture worked. I think the other thing is that few people realize how hard people in the White House work. It's incredibly long hours, which means quality time with family is essential. And Laura and I both understood that. And it's not a matter of written policy, it's a matter of feel and the way to create a feeling of inclusiveness. And she did a very good job of that, and our whole team did a very good job of that.